The video. All right, here we are. Thanks, Scott. Today we are, hey everyone, for our conversation design talks. Today we're joined by Scot Westwater from Pragmatic Digital. Hey, Scott.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks for being here. So
Absolutely.
you and I talked to each other about 6 months or so ago. That's when you
Something like that,
started
yeah.
launch. Yeah,
Yep.
we're talking about conversation design, and you could base out of Chicago or close near Chicago somewhere, right?
Yeah, so in the outskirts of Chicago, we're about 15 miles or so outside of Chicago, but primarily just for regional purposes, say we're based out of Chicago because everyone knows where that is.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, and I saw, you've been following you on LinkedIn and Twitter and other places. You've been working or talking a lot about voice design and strategy around it. So I'll let you introduce yourself and Pragmatic Digital, and then we'll dive into more about conversation.
Sure. As you said, I'm Scot Westwater. I'm co-founder of Pragmatic Digital. It's a company that my wife and I actually co-founded about a year and a half ago. And it's really born out of this need for bringing more traditional content strategy, user experience, digital strategy to the voice realm and really helping clients understand what the opportunity with voice is. And, we did this back in web days. We did this with mobile. We're very comfortable having those conversations with clients. And quite frankly, in voice, that's what we're actually talking to a lot of our clients about is, how can we actually help you get ready for what's about to happen? And so that's really where our primary focus is. We're really on the discovery phase of a project if you're more familiar with a more traditional project plan. So we're really going to go out and identify what the business opportunities are, what the audience needs are, the types of language to use, questions that their audience members may have, and really get to understand what the opportunities are and figure out where those overlap, and then ultimately come up with a solution, whether it makes sense to do something for Alexa, Google Home, Bixby, another platform to be named later, whatever. So we try to be as platform agnostic as possible and just help people understand here's really the opportunity that voice represents, and then help them move into that new phase. Because as we're talking to clients, they're like, all right, this is great. I am aware of it. I have no idea how to get my start. And so that's really where we start our conversation is, all right, well, you've got content. Let's help you figure out what we can use, what we need to repurpose, what needs to be rewritten, whatever, to help you at least get your start. And that's really where we've been focusing a lot of our efforts for the past really 6 months or so.
Okay, perfect. So in terms of working with brands at that stage, that requirement stage, that's one thing that I find a lot of organizations, a lot of teams are looking at and saying, okay, should we just build an FAQ bot? Should we take something at bite size of that? Or should we look at a bigger problem or a bigger set of content and say, okay, how do we refactor this? How do you guys approach that? Or what do you recommend that at that stage?
This is going to be such a UX answer. It depends. It really depends on the specific need of the business. And we just need to dip our toe and prove to the stakeholders that, voice is a viable channel? There's a very specific customer service problem that we're trying to solve? So, it really just depends on what the organization is trying to achieve with a voice solution. And quite frankly, we see voice as one of many channels an organization has at its disposal to engage with its audience. So we look at it kind of as a holistic approach for customer experience, and voice happens to be one very powerful piece, a new piece of that. But you still can't discount that there's web and there's social and there's customer service and onboarding and all the stuff that traditional organizations already are doing to some extent. So it's really a matter of figuring out where voice fits in on it. And I don't necessarily think voice is a one-size-fits-all proposition. So as much as it pains me to say it depends, it really does depend on the specific case and the business challenge we're trying to solve.
So what's the most common business challenge that you think it's ripe and ready for voice to take over, or they should be thinking about voice?
I think, just my experience, customer service is a no-brainer. I think like Butterball did a great job with their Turkey's hotline skill and really taking kind of that 30 years of combined knowledge from their operators and offloading some of those common questions onto the device, onto the Alexa device. Because really, if you think about it from a customer experience standpoint, I'm cooking. I probably have stuff on my hands from preparing the turkey. I don't want to pull out my phone and actually be on hold for 20 minutes. So if I can get something quickly, get my answer and then move on, great. I have a positive experience with your brand. And then from Butterball experience, there's less calls coming into the call center because some of these more easy softball questions can be answered by a personal assistant like an Alexa. And so, and I have no way of proving this out, but I got to imagine that they've actually seen some reduction in calls to their call center, and the calls that they are getting are going to be a little bit more complex versus some of the basics. So, just kind of taking that example, there's plenty of cases across every industry where you need to call someone, you need to contact someone, and there's probably 20 to 30% of those calls are common questions that come up all the time. Mm-hmm. And so like, even if you see like a 3 to 5% reduction in call center volume, could be millions of dollars that the organization saves. So I think call center avoidance is a huge untapped use case. I think, just from a marketing standpoint, just getting content onto these devices and just being able to answer the basic questions that your audience has, either related to your product or related to kind of ecosystem or lifestyle around your product. And we're starting to see some brands take advantage of that. Tide specifically, they're definitely kind of in that game right now. But yeah, I think there's a lot of early days, problems that we're running into where they're, maybe the CMO is not necessarily convinced. Maybe we're not doing social media even. So how can we get someone to, invest in voice right now? So there's a lot of, what ROI, what's, the case studies you can share. And that's really been a lot of the conversations we've been having. So when it comes to those types of situations, it's like, all right, let's find something that we can do really well, a small pilot. Let's get some internal momentum behind it, and then let's actually show it off. So that's really resonating really well with a lot of the brand managers and marketers that we've been talking to, because they're like, I can't justify $50,000 spend on something that's totally unproven. So it's really trying to find those small instances where you can make a pretty big impact quickly, and then socializing internally.
So yeah, I know you talked about doing this for web and mobile side of things early on. Do you see any patterns in how people were doing those adoption of mobile technology, for example, when iPhones came out?
100%. I mean, it's so uncanny how this is all lining up exactly like mobile. And even, in the early part of my career, I was starting to work in like 96, 97. So I saw the very early days of the commercial web and trying to get brand managers to even put a website on their packaging. And people were like, why would I do that? That makes no sense. And now it's just a given that every brand that exists has a web presence, right? Same thing with mobile at this point. Like, the expectation from a consumer standpoint is, you have a mobile experience, whether it be an app or responsive site or whatever. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the pattern is lining up exactly. I like to say that right now within voice, this is like knowing the smartphone's about to blow up and become what it ended up becoming about 6 to 9 months before it happened. And that's really kind of where we're at right now. So the adoption rate is happening way quicker than it did with smartphones. So we're even more time compressed. But yeah, when you look at the adoption numbers, the lack of business investments, people in the industry trying to find use cases, like it's really all playing out all over again. And really our message to companies that we work with is now's the time to start experimenting and investing so we can learn how your audience is going to interact with these devices, whether it be, an Alexa skill, chatbot, or whatever, because in a year from now, it's going to be a very different proposition, and your audience is going to have a lot less tolerance if you don't get it right the first time. Right now, there's still a little bit of forgiveness, so they understand some new technology, and they're still trying to figure out what to do with them from a consumer standpoint. But yeah, I think there's a tremendous amount of pattern playing out all over again with really the social web and with mobile.
So in terms of companies who already have web and mobile presence, and they're thinking about voice, do you recommend that they take their existing teams and extend talent from that perspective? Or is that something that they'll need to bring in new talent to tackle this sort of things, like the voice and chatbots?
Yeah, I think some of it can be used with the existing team and infrastructure, especially when it comes to research. User needs don't change based on platform. So their information needs are always going to be the same. How they interact with it obviously is going to be very different. But the types of things that people are looking for and what they would consider valuable, that's all really the same. So I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for UX designers who might do responsive websites, maybe doing mobile apps, to kind of pivot a little bit and start to understand a little bit more about conversation design and really understanding how to execute in this new screenless interface. But I would say by and large, a lot of the stuff that as UX practitioners we've been doing for the past 25 years is directly applicable to voice and chatbot. So it's really about understanding the flow of conversation, understanding what people are trying to even achieve. And again, taking the MVP approach, which I know is kind of a hot button topic depending on who you talk to, but really trying to do something limited and do it really, really well, then start adding stuff on. Because as you'd mentioned before, do you take kind of a top-down approach and really try to create something big and new, or do you start small? And with mobile specifically, we know that if you start smaller and add stuff over time, it's easier for you to validate your idea. It's quicker to market. It's less costly if you make mistakes. Plus, then you're able to iterate and evolve over time. So that's kind of really where I think the huge opportunity is right now for practitioners that are more traditional. Like Susan and I spoke to a UX strategy group in Chicago about a month ago, and there were about 100 UX designer strategists that were in there, and they were all really interested in how they can actually apply their traditional knowledge to this new platform. And I think, as this really, sets off and explodes over the next year, we're going to need those people to help, because there's certainly not enough of us doing strategy, VUI design, voice UX, things like that. We're going to have to get help. And that, to me, is a logical area to pull people over and help train.
Perfect. Yeah, no, definitely. That's one thing that we've seen. A lot of teams are looking at that conversation designer as a role. And then the question becomes, well, who or what is that role really? Like, who brings the expertise in?
Right.
Where it is, we've seen UX designers fill the role. We've seen writers fill in the role, but we've seen some developers and jumping onto that side of it and saying, okay, we can use some sort of techniques to do this. And again, working with the clients that you work with in terms of building that strategy, now that you have your strategy of testing things out, do you roll this out to Alexa and Google Assistant, or do you go with one of those platforms? How do you identify that? Like in iOS and Android side of things, iOS had a clear path to market. There was an app store. Discoverability was easy. Whereas we've seen on Alexa and Google Assistant, do you guys see any difference in terms of the users that these platforms have? Versus, if you're a brand A versus brand B, one might be better than the other one, or do you have to go on both of them to test out the assumptions?
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of testing assumptions first versus saying this is emphatically the direction or the platform you should go after. Mm-hmm. I think we will start to see that the behaviors of Google Assistant users are slightly different than Alexa users versus, say, Siri users. But I don't necessarily know that we have enough data as an industry collective to actually say, well, the Apple people do X and the Amazon people do Y. And quite frankly, I think you're going to see multi-device homes where it's not exclusively Amazon or Google, but you're probably going to see both. And you might even see a Cortana device or Cortana assistant built into the PC, let's say, and then Siri on the computer. So I think there's going to be a lot of that happening. And so because it's early days, it's really hard to say, here's the platform to focus on. But, certainly cost is an issue. If you're developing quote unquote native, if to borrow what we did on mobile, it does become prohibitive to create two totally different experiences for two totally different platforms. And then you add Bixby in on top of it. And then if, Apple opens up Siri, you add that onto it. So I think it ends up becoming a very convoluted market very quickly for creators. I am a big fan, of some of the platforms that exist to help you create content almost like a CMS, and then it pushes it to the different platforms, at least for the basic stuff. And then certainly, through user research, if you have target audience identified, you can start to ask them, what platforms do you have? What are you more active with? Whatever. Like if you're a healthcare company and you want to be HIPAA compliant, right now Amazon's really the only game in town, and that's even kind of limited in what you can do. being that it's a closed system right now. So I think there's certainly considerations, but I can't really just say, here's the direction you client, because we truly don't know how these different users are behaving on the different platforms yet.
And we talk about voice a lot when we talk about assistants, but there are other text platforms too, like Messenger, WhatsApp.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And there's Line, there's Telegram, there's business channels like Slack, and they've all been there for a little longer than voice has been.
Yep.
And they all have the amount of engagement that they get is even if not close to what voice is getting as well.
Right.
And one thing that we noticed that a lot of these customers who have had taken the first step in text chatbots might look at it and say, well, can we take that experience and just port it over to voice, or should we really rethink voice as separate channel altogether than text chatbots?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it was about 2016, I want to say, 2017. Conversation design within UX was a huge hot topic, specifically around chatbots. And so everyone's like, we need to learn how to do conversation design. We need to, figure out how to create these chatbots. And there was a lot of hype around it, which there's actually something happening, I think, on Twitter today, where people are talking about the hype of voice and is it like chatbots and like every other technology. And I think, there's that initial hype where people get really excited and they're like, this is going to be the next thing. And then it kind of, as the reality of creating things sets in, it kind of dies down a little bit. And then as people figure out use cases, it definitely comes back. I think I always believe that chatbots are a stepping stone to voice, much like AR is a stepping stone to full VR. So I think you can take a lot of learnings from your chat experience and what works and what doesn't, and potentially what people will ask in the sequence that they'll ask it, and at least use that to inform what you've done. But I still think there's enough nuance where using natural language is going to necessitate a slightly different approach. People tend to ask full questions when they speak, whereas when they're typing into a text thing, it might be a little bit shorthand, a little bit more like keyword search versus long tail search. So I think it's a really great place to start, and certainly if someone has a good chatbot experience, they can take that, port it to voice, put it out in the marketplace, see how people respond, and then evolve accordingly. That might be a good way to kind of shortcut the process instead of needing to do a full-blown discovery, and how, like I said, content needs are going to be the same regardless. It's just how we interact with it. So I think that's actually, it would be a good way to at least dip your toe into voice if you're already in conversation design, specifically with chatbots.
So you talked about discoverability a little bit in terms of, and that's from day one on chatbots all the way to voice now. Every single time we talk about it, somebody's asked, how do we make it discoverable?
Right.
And to me, it's like, how the Facebook pages started off. Like they're discoverable because you tell people about it. Is that the way voice bots are discoverable right now? Because I'm not searching on Alexa. I'm on Alexa and say, Alexa, how do I do this? Or Alexa is not recommending me anything right now.
Right.
So it's really up to the brand to tell me about it. But do you see that discoverability to be something that, as a part of your design strategy, you look at it and say, okay, how do we make discoverable?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually in our presentation that we give, kind of the, here's what the business case is, here's what the opportunity is, here's some case studies. We have a slide in there where we actually say, if you build it, they won't necessarily come. Yeah. And it's actually Don Draper in front of a boardroom and presenting, and it says your awesome skill name here. But it's the idea that, just like you said with Facebook pages, it was exactly what happened with mobile apps too. If you remember when mobile apps first came out, the iOS store had a really huge discoverability issue. And so brands started creating landing pages with a sign up and we'll let you know when it's officially released and a little counter. And it was kind of like this velvet curtain kind of a thing. They were trying to create buzz for something that, could easily have just they could have put on the App Store and just put there and forgotten about it. But I think there is a huge need for using traditional methods of awareness. So whether it's your social channels, your email, if you have a Facebook Messenger, whatever, just to get the word out, because if you build it, we know that they're not going to find it. And so I think what we're seeing in the voice skill store on Alexa and whatever, it's what happened with iOS. It's exactly what happened with Android. People weren't necessarily trained to go there. And as I talk to more brands and even consumers, it definitely feels like there's a need for more education around how to find skills, how to find information, what I can even do with my Alexa or Google Home, what's a flash briefing, like all these things that we kind of in the industry take for granted and go, oh yeah, that's old news. It's still very new to a lot of people. And so I think we just haven't reached that education mark yet with the mass public and with our clients to understand where I would actually go to find these, how I would invoke it, all those things. And as we've seen, both Google and Amazon come out with innovation that really help with discoverability. So, they acknowledge it, whether it's publicly or in private, but they've at least acknowledged there's an issue with trying to find this information, and they're working on things to help creators actually be found as they put stuff out there as well.
So we saw at the Amazon Remars conference, the Alexa conversations, and Google I/O. We saw some interesting stuff happening with voice, beyond just the Google Assistant devices. It's built into your Android device. You can do awesome things like book everything or browse the web and all sort of fun things. What excites you the most in the next few years about voice?
Well, I think what excites me the most, and this is kind of like the business nerd and strategist in me, we're starting to see Amazon and Google's corporate strategies playing out, with the skills and the way Alexa asks for or finds information on that first and second search. Like they're trying to choke off organic web traffic. And so you see that happening, and then you see Google coming out and saying, oh, we're going to index podcasts, or we're going to serve up, podcast content as answers now and like that to kind of combat that. So we're starting to see the business strategies really start to formulate beyond just, here's the platforms and here's the different things that you can do with it. So that's really interesting to me. I do think the fact that audio just in general has become such a huge area of opportunity, and there's also very few brands that are taking advantage of it. That's really the area that excites me, because you can do other things when people are like listening to a podcast, let's say, or you could be cooking and ask a question to an Alexa. And so I think it's going to start to usher in this whole new era of how we interact with information and content. And I also look at, the younger generation. I've got a 6-year-old at home, and when he was 4, I showed him how to use YouTube Kids. And every time he'd be like, Dad, I want you to find Titanic, or Dad, I want you to find sharks. And I finally, after probably one day of this happening multiple times, said, hey, do you see that red button there with the little microphone? He goes, yeah. I go, hit it. He goes, okay, now what? I was like, tell it what you want. And his eyes got really big, and it's like the whole world opened up to him. Yeah. And so for me, the true realization of voice will come in generations after ours. Mm-hmm. I think we're laying the groundwork for that. But seeing, someone who's 6 years old who is starting to read, still be able to find information that they're looking for and have really in-depth conversations on topics like the Titanic and the Loch Ness Monster and sharks and whatever, like those are conversations I probably wasn't even having until I was like 12 years old. So I think it's really interesting to see how voice is going to enable a whole new generation to be even more literate, quote unquote literate, without needing to actually be able to read.
Yeah, the access to information is going to get easier and easier. We have a 2-year-old who can now, to her, our kitchen lights and everything else is controlled by Google Assistant. So he doesn't know what a switch is. She's like, just ask these devices, they do things to you. And which is interesting from a parenting perspective, because now you have to consciously use please, thank you, and all that talking to digital assistant.
Yep.
It's interesting. What's your wish list for, like, if you if you were sitting with the Alexa team or Google Assistant team or Bixby team, and they're like, what's missing that can make a killer use case for your customers in terms of working in the strategy side of things that you're working with? What's the one thing that you see and you're like, oh, I wish we could do this?
Right. I do a lot of work with the healthcare industry. And so there's a lot of HIPAA considerations, privacy considerations, related to, protected health information, personal information, things like that. So having truly HIPAA compliant platforms where it's something easily to, you can easily create something with it would be the ideal. I think beyond that, just being able to have deeper, trying to think of the best way to describe this. So deep, Alexa and Google Home do a really great job of being very wide and they a lot of stuff, but once you get into specific verticals, they don't go super deep. So being able to have the machine understanding and learning, understand industry specific things, and whether it be jargon, acronyms, this means that kind of a thing. Like, I think that's going to really happen over the next, say, 4 to 5 years, especially as healthcare starts to really innovate and create stuff for this. They're going to have to be able to understand, well, here's what all the different diseases are, here's what all the different therapeutic options are, solutions, whatever. And so I think it's, being able to get super deep into an industry would be on my wish list, because I work with, pretty specific industries. I've heard people, being interested in data visualization and being able to pull up sales numbers and things like that. So some of the stuff you can do in Salesforce with their assistant as they roll out features. But yeah, I think it's just to be able to make the platform, more ubiquitous by being very deep in specific industries. And I know it's going to be a hard road to toll. I know there's going to be a lot of work in partnership with these industries. But I think as we mature and we start to get more adoption of these things, we're going to need to have that. And then I think the other thing, which is maybe a little bit more of a dream, is to have some sort of cross-platform capability. So it's less about working with Alexa or Google Assistant or whatever, but it's more about just accessing your information. And if it happens to come from Cortana, awesome. If it happens to come from Google Assist, great. But because what we're finding is, people don't necessarily care as much as they did with their iPhone and their Android, because they don't have it in their hand. And so there's less affinity for whatever the brand of the assistant is, as long as I get the information I'm looking for. So I know that's going to be a little bit more difficult given the companies that we're talking about and, what we're trying to do and whatnot. But I think, as a industry, the more we can work together to share that understanding and help raise all boats, I think it's just going to make voice become the ubiquitous interface that it really should be.
Perfect. And I know you guys are talking at the Voice Summit.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit about that talk. What's happening at the talk? I know a lot of our listeners and viewers will be coming to that conference. So now tell them about it.
Yeah. So it's going to be a talk where I think we're calling it what's next, or now what. And so the idea is, all right, so you're a brand, you're aware of voice. Now what do? You probably have a lot of content that you've already created. You've got websites, maybe you've got apps, whatever. So how do you actually suss out what your audience needs are? And so it's kind of going to be two parts. First part is going to be, a little bit of reinforcement on adoption numbers, business investments, some of that more basic stuff. And then the second part of it is actually going to be two different workshops where we start to identify content needs, audience information needs, things like that. And then some semblance of a journey map exercise where we start to identify use cases specifically for a fictitious company. So the idea is we're trying to help people understand. So not only, this is a thing, but giving them some of the tools that we use as UX professionals, content strategists, to actually start to suss out what their audience's information needs are. Because I think that's one of the big things that the UX and content strategy side does really well. So kind of marrying our expertise in that and bringing it to this new medium to help people understand, brand managers, CTOs, whoever the case might be. Here's how you can start to suss out what your audience might need out of it, and here's where you really want to start your efforts.
Perfect. I'm looking forward to it, actually. So I'll be there.
Nice.
And just to close things off, how can people reach out to you? What's the best way?
I'm very active on LinkedIn. So I think it's /Scot Westwater with one T, Scott. Or on Twitter, I'm at Scot Westwater. And then you could always find us on the web. It's pragmatic.digital is our website.
Perfect. Well, thanks again for taking the time talking to us today. And looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.